heavy silver frame slipped from Ethan's fingers, the thick glass backing shattering against the dark herringbone hardwood floor, with a sharp, echoing crack that seemed to instantly freeze the air inside the massive, silent study. In the wheelchair across the room, Isabella Monroe, the ruthless, brilliant billionaire CEO of Monroe Global, stiffened, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, with knuckles turning white as her eyes flashed with a sudden, defensive fury. Ethan did not look up immediately. His eyes locked instead on the faded photograph that had slid from the broken frame, staring intently at the image of a laughing 7-year-old girl at a summer fair who was wearing a distinctive hand-woven blue leather sailor's knot bracelet. It was the exact, unmistakable heirloom bracelet that his own 8-year-old daughter, Lily, wore every single day back in their modest apartment, a unique token that his late wife had crafted with her own hands before the tragedy that had rewritten their lives. Isabella's voice cut through the silence like broken glass, demanding to know why a common low-status physical therapist dared to touch her private memories, completely unaware that the quiet, composed man cleaning up the shards was the very same off-duty paramedic who had pulled that little girl from a burning highway wreckage 8 long years ago. To find out how this hidden connection would completely upend a multi-billion-dollar empire and heal 2 broken families, stay until the very end. If stories about quiet, overlooked heroes who silently carry the weight of the world speak to your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. As we love welcoming new voices into our growing family here, it raises a profound question that many families still debate today. When someone in high power becomes bitter and pushes the world away, do they deserve the patient endurance of a good man? Or should they be left to face the cold reality of the isolation they created 14 months earlier? None of this complex web of secrets and corporate tension existed. The name Isabella Monroe was synonymous with unyielding power, a brilliant 36-year-old executive who had built Monroe Global into a $45 billion maritime and terrestrial logistics empire through sheer uncompromising will. She was a woman who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, navigating the cutthroat waters of international commerce while keeping her competitors at bay, with a flawless icy exterior, but a devastating multi-car collision on a rainy Tuesday evening changed everything in a fraction of a second, leaving the formidable CEO with severe spinal trauma and a partial paralysis from the waist down that confined her to her sprawling, isolated estate. In the wake of the accident, the brilliant executive found herself trapped in a prison of her own body, a reality her fierce pride simply could not accept. Her grief and frustration quickly manifested as a scorching, defensive anger, transforming her private quarters into a revolving door of medical professionals. Elite physical therapists, world-renowned neurologists, and highly paid personal care assistants arrived at the estate with impressive credentials, only to flee within days, completely broken by Isabella's biting sarcasm, intense distrust, and absolute refusal to cooperate with her rehabilitation. The board of directors at Monroe Global began to whisper in the shadows, their confidence wavering as the weeks stretched into months without any sign of recovery, creating a dangerous vacuum that Julian Vance, the charming and polished vice president of the company, was all too eager to exploit. Julian was a man who used the smooth language of corporate concern to mask a predatory ambition, subtly planting seeds of doubt among the investors, suggesting that Isabella's physical limitations had permanently compromised her ability to lead a global empire. Meanwhile, on the outer edges of the city, Ethan Brooks lived a life defined by quiet discipline and a deep, unshakable devotion to his 8-year-old daughter Lily, a former lead paramedic who had walked away from the high-stress world of emergency services after the sudden tragic loss of his wife. Ethan now worked as a humble, independent physical therapist, taking on low-status home health contracts just to ensure he could be present for his daughter. Ethan was a man of few words, choosing to express his competence through silent, meticulous action rather than loud assertions, possessing an extraordinary ability to notice the minute structural details and subtle physical movements that others routinely overlooked. His primary focus was ensuring that Lily had the stability she needed, working tirelessly to afford the specialized tutoring and gentle environment her sensitive nature required. When a temporary agency reached out to him with an incredibly lucrative, high-stakes contract at the Monroe estate, a position that every other therapist in the tri-state area had explicitly turned down out of fear for their reputations, Ethan accepted it without hesitation. He did not care about the billionaire's legendary temper or the corporate intrigues surrounding her name. He only saw an opportunity to secure his daughter's financial future for the next year. On his very first morning, as he walked through the towering iron gates of the estate, carrying a worn leather bag filled with simple, practical therapy tools, he was met by Julian Vance, who gave him a dismissive, patronizing smile, casually warning him that he would likely not last 48 hours under the roof of the paralyzed tyrant. Ethan merely nodded, his face a mask of calm composure, before stepping into the grand mansion where his quiet endurance would soon face its ultimate test. 6 weeks would pass before the silent echoes of that first meeting would begin to tear the polished veneer of Monroe Global completely apart. The daily sessions inside the sunlit, yet emotionally suffocating conservatory of the estate quickly became a battle of wills. Though Ethan never once engaged in the conflict that Isabella so desperately tried to provoke, she would routinely hurl insults at his simple methods, mock his unbranded attire, and deliberately knock over the resistance bands and balance blocks he carefully arranged, attempting to break the calm composure that seemed to shield him from her wrath. Ethan never raised his voice, never offered a defensive retort, and never allowed his posture to reflect the exhaustion that many hours of patient endurance naturally brought. Instead, he worked in absolute stillness, observing the precise way her lower back shifted when she attempted to move, noting the microscopic muscle twitches in her right quadricep that previous, highly credentialed doctors had dismissed as involuntary spasms rather than signs of viable neural pathways. He kept his boundaries entirely professional, speaking only when providing clear, concise instructions for her exercises, a boundary he strictly maintained to protect the peace of his home life and ensure that his daughter Lily remained shielded from the turbulent world of high finance. Isabella, accustomed to sycophants who flinched at her anger, or opportunists who tried to flatter her wealth, found herself deeply unsettled by Ethan's complete indifference to her billions, her sharp mind constantly working to find the flaw or the hidden motive in the quiet therapist's dedication. The fragile equilibrium shattered completely on a warm afternoon when Julian Vance arrived at the estate unannounced, bringing with him a powerful delegation of 3 major board members under the guise of an urgent executive wellness review. Julian's true intent was entirely predatory. He wanted the board to see Isabella at her absolute lowest point, vulnerable and incapacitated, to solidify his ongoing narrative that Monroe Global required a new, vibrant leader at the helm. The ambush caught Isabella completely off guard, her pride instantly flaring, as she found herself surrounded by the very people she had commanded for a decade, all of them now looking down at her with a mixture of pity and calculated judgment. Desperate to demonstrate her independence and salvage her authority, Isabella insisted on showing the board her progress, demanding that Ethan assist her to a standing position, using the parallel bars he had set up in the center of the room. Ethan stepped forward, his sharp eyes immediately recognizing that her muscles were far too fatigued from the morning's unrecorded struggles, and he softly advised her against the attempt, noting that the neural fatigue was too high for a safe transition. Infuriated by his public caution and feeling cornered by Julian's subtly mocking smile, Isabella snapped, pushing Ethan away with surprising force and demanding that he shut up and do his job. She lunged forward to grip the bars, but her weakened legs completely failed to engage, and she collapsed heavily onto the floor, a devastating, public display of helplessness that left the boardroom members in a shocked, uncomfortable silence. The humiliation was absolute, and in that moment of profound vulnerability, Isabella's defensive instincts took over with venomous intensity, turning her internal shame into an external weapon directed entirely at the man who had tried to protect her. Standing up from the floor with the assistance of Julian, she pointed a trembling finger at Ethan, loudly accusing him in front of the entire delegation of being a thoroughly incompetent, low-rate fraud whose reckless and outdated techniques were actively destroying her nerves and causing her physical harm. She declared that he was nothing more than a desperate charity case she had hired out of pure pity, shouting that he was instantly terminated from his position and ordering the estate security to throw him off the property without a single dime of severance. Julian Vance stood in the background, a smooth, triumphant smile playing across his lips as he watched the final thread of Isabella's support system snap, knowing that this public breakdown would be the exact evidence he needed to execute his corporate takeover at the upcoming annual meeting. Ethan did not offer a single word of defense, nor did his expression betray a hint of anger. He simply knelt on the floor, quietly gathering his scattered tools and placing them neatly back into his worn leather bag. He stood up, looked at Isabella with a profound, silent pity that cut through her rage far deeper than any shouting match could have, and walked out of the grand estate into the pouring rain, leaving the billionaire completely alone with the corporate sharks who were already measuring the executive office for her replacement. If you have ever experienced a moment in your own life where your hard work was thrown back in your face, or you felt completely unseen and underestimated by those who thought they were above you, please share your story in the comments so our community can stand by you. 3 weeks would pass before the silent echoes of that devastating mistake would begin to tear the polished veneer of Monroe Global completely apart. In the weeks that followed Ethan's abrupt and humiliating departure, the Grand Monroe estate grew darker and more silent than it had ever been. The vast rooms filled only with the soft footsteps of high-priced replacements, who possessed countless degrees, but entirely lacked Ethan's sharp intuition. These new therapists, thoroughly intimidated by Isabella's fierce reputation and terrified of losing their lucrative retainers, refused to challenge her, allowing her to dictate her own passive routines and offering nothing more than superficial massages and empty flattery. As a direct result, Isabella's physical regression was alarmingly rapid, her joints stiffening and the vital, microscopic muscle firings that Ethan had painstakingly cultivated beginning to fade into complete dormancy. Alone in her massive, shadow-filled study during the late hours of the night, she would stare out at the city skyline, feeling the crushing weight of her isolation, her sharp mind continuously replaying the image of Ethan's quiet, dignified exit and the profound pity in his eyes that she could not seem to forget. Meanwhile, Julian Vance was moving with terrifying efficiency behind the scenes, utilizing the documentation of her public fall to officially petition the board for an emergency session, confidently scheduling a mandatory leadership vote that would permanently strip her of her CEO title and hand the keys of the empire to him. The turning point arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning when Sarah, Isabella's fiercely loyal but long-suffering executive assistant, was tasked with clearing out the final administrative paperwork and unresolved payroll disputes left behind from Ethan's brief tenure. While sorting through a stack of old certification copies and background compliance forms that Ethan had submitted, Sarah's eyes caught a faded, official document nestled at the bottom of the folder. A state paramedic commendation log from 8 years prior. As she read through the technical descriptions of a multi-car pileup on Interstate 90, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening as she recognized the name of the 7-year-old survivor who had been pulled from a burning vehicle by an off-duty paramedic who had risked his own life before vanishing before the media arrived. That little girl was Sophia Monroe, Isabella's beloved younger sister, who had tragically passed away from an unrelated illness just 2 years ago, but whose life had been extended by those precious, beautiful years solely because of that anonymous rescue. Sarah rushed into the study, her hands trembling as she laid the document directly over the corporate briefs on Isabella's mahogany desk, softly explaining that the quiet therapist they had so cruelly humiliated was the very same man Isabella had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to track down and thank years ago. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow, the icy armor around her heart shattering instantly as she stared at Ethan's signature on the old rescue log, a profound wave of remorse and horror washing over her as she realized how monstrously she had treated the savior of her family. Without a moment's delay, overriding the protests of her medical staff, she ordered her driver to take her directly to the modest working-class suburb listed on Ethan's old address form, desperate to right a wrong that now weighed heavier than her paralysis. She found Ethan in the small, oil-stained garage attached to his humble home, quietly patching up a well-worn bicycle for his daughter Lily, his movements just as calm and measured as they had been in her opulent conservatory. Sitting in her wheelchair at the edge of his driveway, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, the billionaire CEO offered him a blank check and a permanent executive title within the company's foundation, her voice cracking with an uncharacteristic emotion as she begged for his forgiveness. Ethan paused his work, setting down his tools with a slow, deliberate care, and looked at the powerful woman who had once shouted him down in front of the world. He calmly pushed the blank check back toward her, stating with absolute clarity that his dignity and his family's peace were not commodities that could be purchased with corporate funds, and that he only worked with patients who respected the human dignity of the person trying to help them. He informed her that he would only consider returning if she agreed to absolute medical authority over her schedule, free from the interference of her board, and if she committed to fighting for her recovery with genuine humility rather than bitter pride. Just as Isabella eagerly nodded, accepting every single one of his strict conditions with a desperate gratitude, Sarah's voice broke through the speaker of Isabella's phone with a sudden, panicked urgency, delivering a devastating message from the corporate headquarters. Julian Vance had successfully manipulated a loophole in the corporate bylaws, moving the emergency board vote forward to this coming Friday morning, leaving Isabella with exactly 96 hours to prove she possessed the physical capability to lead, or watch her life's work be permanently stolen away. Exactly 96 hours remained on the clock before the ultimate confrontation would decide the fate of everything Isabella had built. The atmosphere inside the Monroe estate transformed instantly into a high-intensity rehabilitation camp, with Ethan moving into the guest quarters temporarily, along with his daughter Lily, whose bright presence immediately began to alter the emotional landscape of the massive mansion. While Lily spent her afternoons coloring quietly at the edge of the room, her hand-woven blue leather sailor's knot bracelet serving as a silent, powerful reminder of the deep, unseen threads connecting their histories. Ethan initiated a rigorous, continuous 48-hour physical therapy protocol. He demonstrated a profound, precise technical competence that completely eclipsed the textbook methods of her previous doctors, utilizing advanced techniques of proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, PNF, to aggressively re-stimulate the dormant pathways between her brain and her lower limbs. He worked manually for hours, applying precise, calculated resistance to the dorsiflexors of her feet, specifically targeting the peroneal nerve to combat the severe foot drop that had crippled her stride, while constantly monitoring the anterior tibialis for the slightest hint of voluntary contraction. Ethan's calm voice remained a steady anchor as he guided her through intense, exhausting core stabilization exercises, focusing heavily on the recruitment of the transversus abdominis and the gluteus medius to establish the deep pelvic alignment necessary for her to support her own weight. He explained the biomechanics of her injury not with distant medical jargon, but with a clear, practical logic, explaining how the nervous system responds to intent and steady pressure rather than forced, angry exertion, teaching her to find strength in relaxation rather than tension. This intense, exhausting struggle against time brings up the secondary debate line: whether Ethan should have revealed his past connection to her family much sooner to gain her trust, or if his silent endurance was the only honorable way to ensure she respected him for his current skill rather than his past sacrifice. As the hours ticked away toward the Friday deadline, the physical breakthroughs began to manifest, not through miraculous leaps, but through the steady, quiet accumulation of precise movements under Ethan's watchful eye. By Thursday evening, after a grueling session that left both of them completely drenched in sweat, Isabella managed to sustain an independent, 3-second voluntary contraction in her quadriceps, her eyes filling with tears as she felt a spark of genuine connection to her limbs for the first time since the accident. On the fateful morning of the emergency board meeting, the grand corporate headquarters of Monroe Global was filled with an electric, predatory tension, with Julian Vance standing at the head of the massive mahogany conference table, confidently presenting a formal medical incapacity motion to the assembled investors. He displayed detailed, biased reports from the sycophantic therapists he had influenced, smoothly arguing that Isabella Monroe was permanently bedridden, emotionally unstable, and utterly incapable of executing her executive duties for the foreseeable future. Just as the board members lifted their pens to cast the final votes that would seal her corporate execution, the heavy double doors of the boardroom suddenly swung open with a dramatic, echoing force that caused every executive to turn in absolute shock. Isabella Monroe entered the room, sitting tall in her chair. But as Julian offered a condescending, smooth expression of sympathy, she did something that no one in the room thought possible. Placing her hands firmly on the armrests, utilizing the precise biomechanical leverage and core stabilization that Ethan had taught her over the grueling days, she slowly, deliberately stood up on her own 2 feet, gripping the edge of the table with a fierce, unyielding determination that struck a profound silence through the room. With Ethan standing silently at the very back of the hall, like an unyielding shadow of support, Isabella threw a thick, comprehensive forensic audit report directly onto the center of the table, proof meticulously compiled by Sarah over the last 48 hours, showing that Julian Vance had been systematically embezzling corporate funds and deliberately falsifying her medical updates to the board to accelerate his own illegal takeover. Julian's face turned an ashen, deathly pale as the realization hit him that his carefully constructed empire of lies had completely unraveled in the face of absolute, undeniable truth. 1 month later, an ordinary Thursday afternoon would change everything neither of them had said out loud yet. The reaction within the boardroom was immediate and absolute, the polished composure of the corporate directors instantly evaporating as they viewed the undeniable evidence of Julian Vance's systemic betrayal and financial fraud. The board voted unanimously to strip Julian of his titles, terminating his contract effective immediately, and authorizing the corporate legal counsel to hand over the entire forensic audit to federal entities who were already waiting in the buildings. lobby to escort him out in handcuffs. Isabella stood tall at the head of the table until the doors closed behind her former deputy. Her physical stance, a powerful testament to the extraordinary journey of recovery she had silently undertaken. Turning to the remaining members of the board and the assembled press who had gathered in the outer halls, she publicly acknowledged that her survival, her presence, and the preservation of Monroe Global were entirely owed to the unmatched character, brilliant skill, and quiet dedication of Ethan Brooks. She officially announced the creation of a massive, multi-million-dollar health initiative within the company, offering Ethan the prestigious position of executive director, with a compensation package and stock options that would have permanently placed him among the city's elite. Ethan walked forward from the back of the room, his demeanor just as calm, composed, and humble as it had been when he was clearing broken glass from her study floor. And he softly, firmly declined the showy corporate title and the massive personal wealth. Instead, he looked Isabella directly in the eye and asked for something far more meaningful and systemic. He requested that the entire multi-million-dollar allocation be redirected to fully fund and construct 3 state-of-the-art, free community physical therapy and trauma rehabilitation clinics in the city's lowest-income neighborhoods. He explained that ordinary families and working-class individuals who faced devastating injuries did not have access to elite care or specialized treatment, and he wanted to ensure that the gift of recovery was shared with those who had no corporate boards to protect them. Isabella looked at the quiet man standing before her, her own pride completely dissolved by his selflessness, and she agreed to his conditions without a single moment of hesitation, realizing that true leadership was not about commanding an empire, but about uplifting the people who kept the world moving forward. 6 months later, a warm, quiet Sunday afternoon found the sprawling lawns of the Monroe estate filled with a gentle, unfamiliar warmth that the grand property had not seen in decades. The high iron gate stood wide open, and the sound of sweet, innocent laughter echoed through the manicured gardens as Lily ran across the grass, her blue leather sailor's knot bracelet catching the golden sunlight as she played with the estate's golden retriever. Isabella sat on the outdoor patio, no longer confined to the heavy wheelchair, but resting comfortably in a simple garden chair, an elegant, polished wooden cane leaning against the table next to her as a symbol of her ongoing, independent progress. Ethan walked out from the house, carrying 2 warm cups of tea, his movements steady and relaxed as he set one down before the woman who had transformed from a bitter patient into his deepest confidant and partner. Next to her tea sat the silver picture frame, beautifully repaired with fresh solid glass, housing the photograph of her late sister Sophia, alongside a brand new photograph of Ethan, Lily, and Isabella smiling together at the same summer fair grounds. Isabella looked up at Ethan, her eyes filled with a profound peace as she remarked that her accident, though tragic, had been the greatest blessing of her life, because it had stripped away the illusions of her wealth and forced her to find the only things that truly mattered. A family that refused to give up on her, and a love built on absolute trust. Ethan smiled, a rare, beautiful expression of complete contentment, and sat down beside her, his long journey of silent endurance finally leading to the quiet harbor where his family was whole, valued, and deeply loved. In a world that often measures human value by the loudness of your declarations, the size of your bank account, or the impressive titles printed on your business card, it is incredibly easy for the quiet, dedicated souls who truly build and heal our communities to be completely overlooked. The Ethans of this world do not shout their achievements from the rooftops or demand validation from those who think they are above them. They simply show up every single day, notice the vital details that others miss, and mend the broken pieces of our lives with humility, grace, and an unyielding strength of character. If you are currently feeling unseen, undervalued, or pushed aside by a culture that only looks at the surface, Remember that your true worth is entirely unshakable, and the right people will eventually recognize the profound depth of your heart. Has someone in your own life ever been misjudged the way Ethan or Isabella were? Written off by the world before anyone bothered to really see their true value or the silent pain they were carrying? Tell us their name or share their moment in the comments below, even if it is just to finally give them the recognition they so richly deserve. If you believe that the quiet, overlooked people of this world deserve to be seen and celebrated, we warmly invite you to become a permanent part of our family here by subscribing, so we can continue sharing these meaningful journeys together. Thank you for staying until the very end, and take care.